Hello and welcome to this campaign building video where today I'm talking about designing the map for my world that our campaign is going to be set into. So we've already got our campaign, we've got our master plot, we've got our plans, we've got our adventures that we're starting to break down, but now we've realized we've got to the point now where we need to have our maps. Now the most important thing here is that the world that we're going to be using is a fractured floating island based world. Floating land masses was the consensus of the type of world that we're going to be playing in, so we need to do that map. So the way that we're going to do that map, the way that I'm thinking of anyway, and I'm going to use Incarnate here, incarnate.com, fantastic free map software. You can also upgrade it to the professional version, which is the version that I'm using here, but I'm going to use it here to illustrate my points. Now, one of the things that I wanted to look at was the idea that our theme is about perseverance. So I want to show how a planet can persevere in terms of still being a planet, even though it's been fractured and split apart and broken up into different layers. The other thing that I was thinking of is that when we talk about a fractured Earth, a fractured sort of floating space, just to take normal geography and invert it, so you've got floating mountains and that sort of thing, implies that there is at least a lower strata that the characters could get to that is not fractured, is not broken up. And I don't particularly like that idea. What I also want to do is I want to play around with the idea that we've got three layers. So my thinking is that we're going to have, and I'm going to use this here just to make my point, is that we've got a zone, if you like, here of our very core pieces of landmass that are still going to be fractured. Then we have an outer floating layer that hovers around this core. This outer floating layer will probably be the biggest land masses, the biggest continents, if you like. This will be where the majority of the game takes place, I would imagine. So we're sort of looking at multiple layers, if you like, of worlds, of planets sort of existing. Not planets, of continents existing. And then I want to have an extreme outer layer, a very far out layer. So our planet looks like it's literally shattered from within. So we've got this inner core. It wouldn't be solid. Let me just make that absolutely clear. It wouldn't be solid. It would be fractured as well, quite badly. This is actually giving me quite a nice effect if I just sort of randomly obliterate land masses. I feel all powerful. Destroy the planet with magical energies. Yes. All right. So this is the idea. It's almost like an onion-like world, if you like, where the campaign is now going to take place. We've got a lot of different logistics to try and work out. And I do want to point out that the way that I'm going to do this map is I'm actually going to draw it as four separate layers, four separate maps, if you like, of the same planet that would then overlay on one another. Now, ordinarily, this would be very difficult to print out to give to your players, aside from giving it as four separate sheets. You could, and this was an idea I had a long time ago, what you could do is you could hand it out as printed out onto transparency sheets so that each transparency layer sits over the one underneath it, and so you get your idea of this virtual world. So that's definitely something that one can consider. However, we're in the age of computers now, so we're going to be using four layers which we'll be able to hide and reveal and bring about as we hide and reveal those layers. So that's really how it's going to work for us in this particular case. Now, there are many things that start to inspire one when you are designing planets, when you're designing your starting continental spaces, is if I just look at this, if I absolutely look at this, and how can I do this here? If I take a color, let me just color this in. So let's say yellow is our outlying area. So we've got yellow out here. These pieces are going to be exposed quite terrifically to the sun. They really are going to get lots of exposure. So that's absolutely fantastic. That's something to bear in mind. Are these desert-like regions? I don't know. They could just be very light, very happy kind of regions. Then as we go further in, we're going to get less light because we're going to get the natural shade from the continental drifts above us, aren't we? We're going to get less light coming in from outside as we move deeper in. And of course, as we go deeper in, let's just find a darker shade here. As we go deeper in, it's going to get darker and darker and darker, isn't it? So it's going to make for an interesting location. So instead of having sort of jungles and then plains and then deserts, we've literally got stratum that our characters can move through. Of course, until we get to this final central core. I feel like I should just add that in quickly. When we get to this final sort of shattered space in the middle, I'm not going to leave it solid, don't worry. I don't want anything solid. I just wanted to sort of feel like this core was obliterated. I don't know why I don't have a creation myth yet. Is it necessary? Well, sometimes it is, especially if we've got characters sort of playing priests and that sort of thing. But generally speaking, I don't think it's particularly necessary to have a, off the bat anyway, a creation myth. But if we just look at that, that starts to become quite inspiring from a whole lot of different questions. How do we, for example, move from this outer ring to the inner ring? And how do we move from the inner ring to the core ring? And what type of beings live in this core ring? What type of beings live in this middle ring? And what type of beings live in the outer ring? And what do they think of each other? What is the geopolitical kind of effects that they have on one another? Now, a lot of GMs, when they are trying to create a campaign, they will actually start with the map first. Then they'll outline the geopolitical sort of situation that are going on, and then they start to come up with campaigns based on that. They look, well, these people are going to have resources, these aren't going to have resources, these are going to have this problem or that problem or the next problem. So how do we do it? Well, I don't start that way. Obviously, I start with my idea of my story. My story, of course, is very location-free. It doesn't really have a lot of locations in it. However, we do have our theme, which is perseverance. So the idea is that we're going to have ways and means for our players to move between the different points. We also need the different points to have a lot of requirements for perseverance, but at the same time, perseverance does not mean very boring amounts of large travel. Or, okay, so to get from here to there, you've got to climb cliff faces and things, make 400 checks to climb to the top of that cliff face. We don't want to do that either. So it's a balance between trying to bring that theme in to show perseverance and then take it away. One of the other things that I think about when I look at this kind of geographical map is I go, well, this is an interesting space from a racial diversification perspective as well. These outer regions, I can almost imagine the elves claimed long ago, then the mid-regions are where the humans and the orcs perhaps live, and then these very dark regions is where perhaps we're looking at things like the drow, etc., etc. If we want to go for that kind of setup, for that kind of world, and I think when you're dealing with a planet that does this kind of geography rather than the traditional type of geography, I think it's important to realize that you don't need to change everything for the setting to be different. You can keep a lot of things the same. Yes, you need to anticipate how have the races changed as a result of this cataclysm. How have they changed as a result of the multiple layers? What has evolved? What has been added to or subtracted from? How does that impact what we normally think of as an orc or as an elf, etc., etc.? So what are those implications? Absolutely, those are what we have to think of. Do we have to completely rewrite them and change them so we no longer have things like humans and drow and orc, where we've just got these different entities? Personally, I think that's overkill, and I don't think that you're going to get the same kind of effect that you're hoping for. Lots of players default to playing humans, and the reason for it is that it's a safer space, it's a comfortable space, and usually the humans are the status quo, if you like, of that system or that setting. So we need to make sure that we make the space that's as comfortable for our players as possible. All right, so this is, just by the way, this is a cross section if we cut through the planet. So imagine originally this would have been a solid sphere. We cut it in half, and then the whole thing exploded outwards, so we can sort of see. So this would be the molten core, this would be the middle core, this would be the outer layers that have shattered and broken away. Now, yes, geophysically, absolutely impossible for it to remain in this state. There needs to be a sense of gravity. Where does gravity come from? There needs to be Water movement, absolutely, and I've got an idea on that. I was thinking about it as I was drawing out the map, but the idea here is that we have magic fields and we have gods. So where does the gravity come from? At the very center of this planet, there is a gigantic magnetic magic space. And I know exactly how that's going to work, I think, anyway, in terms of gameplay. It's not going to interfere with my players. It's just a nice little bit of bump to make sure that people who wonder how does this planet exist can actually answer that question. So the idea that I had, anyway, is that the core exploded. This whole planet exploded in this catastrophic event. However, what the mages realized is that whilst this planet was exploding, they could save it. The druids, the mages, the priests, everybody. I like the sort of coming together of multiple magical powers. They came together and they cast a spell of binding in the very center of the planet. So this spell of binding, it links out to the furthest extents of the planet. It keeps our atmosphere there, but what the binding does is it is strongest near the core, so the core stays closest together and it gets weaker and weaker and weaker as it sort of emulates out, or as it permeates out. Hence the outer regions being quite scattered, quite distant from each other, and quite loose as well. They move a lot more than, say, the inner core, which doesn't move very much because of that magical binding spell that was cast at the very center of the planet. Now, what that binding spell is also going to do for us is it's going to change the way that our water system works. Now, the reason why it's so important for us to know how our water system works is because we don't... Yes, we have rivers that will be floating on these land masses, but the rivers are going to fall off. They're going to pour off the edge. We literally have a flat earth paradox. When the water pours off the edge, where does it come from? Now, we don't have to necessarily answer that question. We really don't. However, I do think that one of the key components to this entire endeavor is going to be how we get from point A to point B. How do we get from the outer ring to the inner ring? And I need to make sure that it's not so difficult that the players are not going to be able to do it freely, because the idea for the campaign is to be able to use all of these different territories. So as you know, if you've been watching the campaign videos, we're going to have our heroes somewhere on this, probably on the middle ring, if you like, going about their business. And those three shards, one is going to impact something or someone that lives on the outer ring, and the other one is going to impact the very center of this planet, of course, because that's where it's most dramatic, I think, anyway, for the showdown to happen. So the outer ring they need to be able to get to, and they need to be able to get to the inner ring, and they need to be able to do it fairly quickly. Back to the water problem. So with this spell of binding, which is basically pulling everything into it, I'm going to say that what it does is water pours off of these land masses, and it's all going to pour into the center of this planet. It's going to do that because we've got the spell of binding. It's pulling everything down. It's our artificial gravity, if you like. What it does, though, is it's going to basically act as a slingshot. So the water's going to get pulled down here, go into a sort of a vortex, if you like, a three-dimensional power swirl, and then spray out in the other direction, in random directions. So you've got water pouring into the center of the planet, and at the same time you've got these geysers which shoot out and blast water up to the very extent of the planet, where it's going to then land as rain and then fall back down again and up again in the geysers. So there's our water cycle. What it also does, however, is those upward bound geysers, those jets of water, are going to act as easy transportation system, aren't they? If you can get into a pod and you drop the pod into a geyser, as the geyser fires, you then get shot all the way up into the atmosphere, and then hopefully you cast some kind of feather fall and land safely on the outer edge. No, we wouldn't do that sort of thing with pedestrians, but perhaps we could fire pods up into the air with parachutes that then land down on the surface. I could certainly see that as being used as a war tactic, perhaps. But even if those geysers don't act as transportation systems, although I think that they will, there's a certain amount of structure that you can use there. Even if they don't, that just gives us our water cycle, so we know how we can move around. What that also does is it sets up potentials for adventures. If these geysers suddenly stop, these outer areas are going to dry up very, very quickly. What's caused them to stop? Maybe some deviant has cast or blocked over the usual geyser routes, and they're trying to trap all the water in the central core so they can then blackmail the outer regions for finances. Maybe the geysers start firing, but the water is now superheated, so it rains down on these plains and things, burning up everything. Who knows? Anyway, the idea is that using these kinds of systems, using these kinds of very simple things, and I'm sure they don't work, except that we have magic. Magic is at the very heart of this planet, and of course that's what keeps everything powered and everything going. So, next question. Gravity, does it work as normal? And the answer is yes, for a given value of yes. The rocks that this planet was made out of, I'm going to say the rocks had a rather unusual property, a magical property that causes them to be fairly light. So they're floating. They are actually floating. So the binding spell is trying to pull them together, but this infusion of magic has also pushed them apart, so they float. So they're not this particularly dense kind of material. Hence, being caught in this sort of limbo. I apologize for that. Hence, being caught in this sort of limbo type of space where the planet exists. All right, so that's really a vast amount of explanation on the shape of this planet and getting to the idea of this is what it's going to look like. So I'm actually I'm going to save this out. Actually, I didn't anticipate it being this pretty. I was hoping to actually just draw the land masses, but I think this is a rather effective demonstration anyway of the different types of climates and things that we're going to expect. The only thing that I might add, just for dramatic purposes, maybe I should do that now quickly before I log off, is I wanted to create this barrier because I think all the evil things are going to live down in that dark area. Now, this barrier is literally just blocks of rock, fractured clumps of debris that drift around quite quickly. They spin around that core, I think, and they act as a natural sort of transfer barrier, if you like. So it's not so easy to just move between the places, because otherwise we just have this mass migration of peoples as they move away from the central core. And of course the central core will be where all of the precious metals and the diamonds and all those wonderful sort of things have relocated to, making the core that much more valuable. The outer areas will have less dense sort of minerals and materials and things. Still not enough to offset, if you like, the penalty of living down deep down. Who knows? Maybe there's animosity between them. That's something that we're going to have to look at later on. All right, so there's my rather pretty, I suppose, map of a cross section through this exploded world. And well, I hope that you kind of found that insight useful. I will be doing these basically as audio casts with obviously video, simply because I get in the way if I'm busy drawing and that sort of thing. So let me know. Hopefully you appreciate this sort of thing. Hopefully you like this kind of idea. If you do, of course, hit that like button. If you want to see more, hit that subscribe button as we continue. This will be used, by the way, this map that I'm going to be developing, this will be used in the Save or Dice stream. And you can find the link in the video below that I will be running later on this year for some fantastic role players. You've got Cody from Taking 20, you've got Dave from Nerdarchy, as well as others joining us, which will be absolutely fantastic. And so that these maps will be used there, so you can see them in action. You can see how they affect or actually impact the game. These are not sort of thought studies; these are actual working maps that I will be using, and maybe we'll make them available online as well to our Patreons as we move forward. Anyway, until next time, the next video, of course, I will continue where I'm actually drawing out these maps now, so that we can start to get a sense of just how this world is working, and we'll take it from there. Anyway, thank you for watching, and have a great day.